50% of the nations on earth are having elections this year. And it's obvious to all by now that the ultra elites are beginning to lose their grip on the common people. If truthful and fair elections are allowed to happen, these elites fear they're going to have their leaders, the ones they control, thrown out of power and not be able to achieve their goals. This makes the elites very nervous, and they plan to do something about it. In fact, they've been extremely public about doing something to get their way. Today's teaching then goes much deeper than who's going to win an election. We should really ask the legitimate question whether they will allow elections this year to even take place. And if so, how might they stop them? The USA election makes them more nervous than any of the others. This election was reported to be the central item of discussion in private conversations in back rooms and around the lunch tables at the recent Davos meeting in Switzerland. But the globalist statements weren't all private, and the public ones were very pointed. European Central Bank President Christine Lagarde was very open about what needed to be done. The best defense, if that's the way we want to look at it, is attack. Attack? That sounds like the central bankers and the global elites are planning to interfere in some way with the eternal affairs of a sovereign nation. Fearful that the 45th president of the USA may be on the ticket and could be elected again, caused the globalists to use a military term, attack. They feel severely threatened. Well, why is that? Not only in Europe, but here in the USA as well. An Arizona Senate candidate was approached with a massive bribe to not run for office. You probably heard about this. This led to the head of the Republican Party in Arizona to resign. Allegedly, he was the one offering the bribe. But of course, on behalf of those, quote, out east in Washington. And the reason they didn't want her on the ticket, she didn't support the globalist agenda. See, folks, it's all about the globalists. This Senate candidate tape recorded the conversation. Here is a short clip of that conversation talking about that globalist agenda.
This is back east. There are very powerful people that want to keep you out.
Oh no, they do.
But they're willing to put their money where their mouth is in a big way.
These people are corrupt.
Well, maybe you're right. They want you to be on their team.
But
Just team. You know?
But if they're pushing a globalist agenda, I can't do that. So what do they want? What do they want me to do?
You want to stay out for 2 years.
You would probably have thought this was about the other party, but no, folks. This was the USA's Republican Conservative Party doing this. You see, both parties, they're all sold out. So why are the globalists so frightened that they use military terms in public? Why are they so invested in this globalism that they're willing to pay off those opposed to them? This is Bible teacher Nelson Walters, and today we're going to look at the biblical reasons that the globalists are threatened and what they plan to do about it, how they might plan to, quote, attack, and what you should be doing knowing this in advance. Let's get started. 2024 is a crucial year to the elites, and frankly for the whole world. It is the opinion of this channel that the Feast of Trumpets in October may mark the beginning of the final 7 years of human rule on earth, the 70th week of Daniel or the tribulation, whatever term you prefer. We're not saying it will definitely start then, but we highly suspect it. The reason is the global elites in the United Nations have planned a major event in late September of this year, the Summit for the Future, in which they have announced they will rewrite the UN Charter, having nations surrender part or all of their national sovereignty to the United Nations. They are calling this a once-in-a-generation type of meeting. They plan to have the nations sign an agreement or a covenant called the Pact for the Future. And biblically, I'm sure that word covenant was familiar to you. It may be the covenant with the many described in Daniel 9:27, the one that launches the tribulation period. Also, in May of this year, the globalists are planning to have the UN subsidiary, the World Health Organization, put forward a pandemic preparedness treaty that will give the World Health Organization total control over health care of the nations. This will probably get rolled into the September Pact with the future later in September. And then there's the dividing of the land of Israel, which we've also reported on this channel, that the globalists in Europe and the USA are trying to force this on Israel. This also will likely be bundled into that September Pact for the future that we think may be finalized on the Feast of Trumpets. If it is approved, this treaty will shift world power away from the nearly 200 individual nations to the United Nations and the globalists, forming a one-world governance system. Total power, total control, the ability to roll out digital currency, digital ID, mandatory medical treatments, social credit scoring, 15-minute cities, and eventually the mark of the beast. These are the things the globalists want and feel are at stake in these 2024 elections. However, in many of the countries, including the USA, such a treaty that we just talked about will require some sort of approval process. If the elections don't go the globalist way, the newly elected leaders could reverse or deny the covenant with the many, thwarting the globalists' desires. To the globalists, everything is at stake in 2024. And to us common people, everything is at stake in 2024. Now, before we get into the kind of events that the global elites might be planning in order to sway the elections in the 50% of countries that are having them this year, you need to know where I stand and where most of our community stands in regard to politics. I am not political. Period. I don't think who wins will make a difference prophetically. What God has ordained in His sovereign will and written about in His Word is going to happen. In fact, God appoints leaders and authorities, according to Romans 13:1, for there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. And the majority of our community feels the same way I do. In a recent poll on our channel, we asked the question, how important is the USA election in terms of Bible prophecy? And approximately 2,000 people responded. Only 15% thought this election could change or slow down prophetic events if their candidate was elected. A full 85% agree with me that God is sovereign, and the results of elections have only minor short-term impacts. I feel very good about these results in our community, realizing that we are citizens of heaven first, and heavenly things come before nationalistic earthly things. However, this teaching today isn't about our Christian political attitudes, but it's about people like this Ms. Lagarde and the countless other elites who see these elections all over the world upsetting their apple carts, what they plan to do about it, and the impacts that will have on all of us. It's about what they may be planning to do, not the result of any election. And a shout out today goes to a member of our community and a member of our new AI artist team, Jonathan Merrill, who researched this topic for us and has provided some art. Now, the globalists realize that they've lost the support of the common citizen despite their control of the media and its constant propaganda. In fact, this year's Davos meeting topic was restoring trust. Now, you don't talk about restoring trust unless you've already lost it. They realize that all of their over-the-top activities that they took part in during the pandemic years and the censorship that followed have changed public opinion about them and the leaders that they control at a national level. The public has lost complete trust in the elites and the leaders that they control. They have the support of many national leaders, as we said, but not all. At this year's Davos meeting, one of the invited speakers embarrassed them. The president of Argentina, a populist, was invited to speak and basically told them that the Davos elite were responsible for the world's problems. And he did not like the direction that the elite were trying to take the world. And that's something they just didn't want to hear. The globalists fear that this election cycle will result in many more leaders like him, who simply refuse to rubber stamp the covenant with the many that the globalists will try to force upon the nations. So they realize they need to do something to strongly control the common citizens like you and me and force this covenant on them. This forcing is consistent with Daniel 9:27, and he shall make a strong covenant with the many for 1 week, which happens to be 7 years. Although this passage is really well known, its translation leaves a lot to be desired. The Hebrew word translated make a strong, as in make a strong covenant, is the word gabar. And it's found in the hipfil form. Yeah, I know, we're getting nerdy again. But in this form, it means to force, prevail, or amplify. It doesn't mean to make a covenant. It's more literally meaning to force a covenant on the many, be that Israel or the whole world population as a whole, to force a solution on them that they don't want. Now, ideally, the globalists wish the elections weren't happening at all this year. So the leaders that they already have in place, who will support them and rubber stamp the covenant, will still be there when they need them. But how could they postpone elections? And how can they do it all over the world? To prevent more leaders like the president of Argentina from arising. Obviously, we don't know their plans. What we're going to discuss now is our opinion. They might not do anything, but the fact that they said that they plan to attack, that was their word, makes me suspicious that they are going to try to do something drastic and dramatic. If an event happens that makes it unsafe for regular people like us to go to the poll and vote, and yes, I do vote despite what I said about not being political, that would accomplish their goal and postpone the election. Safety of voters is a key factor, after all. The three things that could cause it to be unsafe for voters that immediately come to mind are 1, civil violence, 2, possible nuclear fallout, or 3, a new pandemic. Or all three could be combined in some sort of massive false flag event. These would not be difficult for wicked people with power to pull off. As we reported in this previous teaching, the nations are already seated with an army of migrants that could be activated. Also, we currently are in the midst of 2 wars, one in Ukraine, one in the Middle East. Even a limited nuclear missile could be fired that creates fallout that the winds carry and that the media says is a danger to all nations. You could see elections being canceled for either reason. Also, the World Health Organization is already planning pandemic preparation for a new pandemic caused by Disease X. And I really chuckle at this one because Disease X is a disease that doesn't currently exist, but they think could exist in the future. Now, pandemics tend to occur worldwide, dangerous ones, about every 100 years. So we're really not due, but of course, they're not going to let us know that. So they're preparing for something that doesn't exist. Now, governments all over the world might lock down their nations again, like they did in the pandemic, in a bid to postpone elections indefinitely due to any one or even all three of these things happening. And that, of course, would postpone these elections just like the elites would want, leaving their current leaders in place that they control. Such a mixture of events would not only be foolproof, of course you can't lose an election that doesn't happen, it might also help convince people that the pact for the future is in the people's best interest. You can hear the propaganda already. We need the UN in charge so nothing like this nuclear blast happens again. We need the UN to help put down these riots coming from the migrants. Or we need the UN and the World Health Organization to be in charge to protect us from this new pandemic. The one for the disease that doesn't exist. But the one thing that is sure is that what is written in Bible prophecy will happen just as it's written. Not as we interpret it, but just as it is written. All three of the things we propose that might happen could fit in the events prophesied in the beginning of the birth pangs period. But it doesn't have to be those things. So you might ask, hey, Nelson, I just listened to this whole video. Why did you bring this up? Because we think it is likely. And second, so that if it happens, you will know that God is still in charge and working his perfect will so that everything he has proposed and prophesied will come true. I know a lot of Americans are placing their hopes on this election, and other countries that are having elections are also placing their hopes on those candidates. But political candidates are not our hope. Jesus and his return on the day of the Lord, that is our hope. So if this happens, what's 2027 going to look like for American Christians? Click right here to keep watching and listen to an incredible dramatization that our channel did of what Americans and America could be like 3 years from now. Till then, this is Nelson, and I'll see you there.